Hi. In one of my videos about Schopenhauer's counsels and maxims, I mentioned a footnote where Schopenhauer cites Kant, a passage from the Critique of Judgment, on the question of misanthropy that comes about due to one's own feeling of superiority to the rest of the human race. In this video, I want to share that passage from Kant with you and compare it with some of what Schopenhauer had to say. As a refresher, here is what Schopenhauer said in Chapter 5 of Counsels and Maxims, page 102 in this volume. Schopenhauer writes, "And on passing his 40th year, any man of the slightest power of mind, any man, that is, who has more than the sorry share of intellect with which nature has endowed 5/6 of mankind, will hardly fail to show some trace of misanthropy. For, as is natural, he has by that time inferred other people's character from an examination of his own, with the result that he has been gradually disappointed to find that in the qualities of the head, or in those of the heart, and usually in both, he reaches a level to which they do not attain. So he gladly avoids having anything more to do with them. For it may be said in general that every man will love or hate solitude, that is, his own society, just in proportion as he is worth anything in himself." Kant has some remarks upon this kind of misanthropy in his Critique of the Faculty of Judgment. And Schopenhauer's footnote mentions the Critique, Part 1, Section 29, note ad fin, the note at the end. So with that in mind from Schopenhauer, I picked up my copy of J.C. Meredith's translation of the Critique of Judgment. Here is the note that Schopenhauer was referring to. This was written in 1790, so about 60 years prior to Schopenhauer's writing Counsels and Maxims. Here's what Kant has to say on a similar subject. "One further remark. The delight in the sublime, no less than in the beautiful, by reason of its universal communicability, not alone is plainly distinguished from other aesthetic judgments, but also from this same property acquires an interest in society, in which it admits of such communication." Saying here that this delight in the sublime is shared among human beings, and so it inclines us towards sociability, towards collaboration with others, communication with other human beings, in this shared spirit of the sublime, unlike other aesthetic judgments, which would be purely personal. Yet, despite this, we have to note the fact that isolation from all society is looked upon as something sublime, provided it rests upon ideas which disregard all sensible interest. I should explain at this point, I guess, if I haven't already, that for Kant, the sublime is connected with a feeling of our own rational superiority to the forces of nature. So I have an experience of the sublime if I, as a human being, stand before a magnificent and powerful waterfall. It almost overwhelms me. It is a tremendous sensual experience, the thundering of the water, the feeling of the power, which is vastly in excess of my own, of nature right there before me. And yet this sort of fear and displeasure is also combined with a feeling of pleasure in my realization that I, as a self-conscious, rational being, am not overwhelmed and destroyed by the natural power in front of me, but instead I master it, right? I am shocked and in awe of it, but still I stand. Okay. And in a sense, I comprehend it by my own rational power of knowing myself to be a being that stands both in and out of nature. So it's a sense in which, in having this sublime feeling, I am most directly aware of my membership in a higher order of beings, of thinking beings who are able to reflect and experience nature, not as a source of terror, like scurrying away like a frightened rat, but as a being who is able to say to the mightiest things in nature, even in my quietest moments, I am superior to you because of my rational ability that transcends nature. So for Kant, that's really the essence of the aesthetic sublime. So when Kant is saying here that isolation from all society has a kind of sublime element to it. He's going to talk about what specifically that is. How is it that a human being withdrawing from society to live alone, how is that sublime? Here's Kant goes on. It says, by the way, provided it does not come from sensible interest, that I'm not just sort of disgusted with the noise, right? If I go like the Grinch to live up in the mountains because I can't stand the noise down in the town, that's not sublime. So Kant goes on. To be self-sufficing, and so not to stand in need of society, yet without being unsociable, that is, without shunning it, is something approaching the sublime. A remark applicable to all superiority to wants. So what has Kant just said? To not need society, but without being unsociable, without shunning society, but to sort of rise above it and no longer need it. That's getting close to something like the sublime in this realm of human social behavior. On the other hand, to shun our fellow man from misanthropy because of enmity towards them, or from anthropophobia, because we imagine the hand of every man is against us, is partly odious, partly contemptible. There is, however, a misanthropy, most improperly so called, the tendency towards which is to be found with advancing years in many right-minded men. That, as far as goodwill goes, is no doubt philanthropic enough, but as the result of long and sad experience is widely removed from delight in mankind. So just to try to explain this briefly, we see we would not call sublime a misanthropy, which is based upon contempt or hatred of mankind. If somebody goes up to live in the mountains and says, I hate people, that's not admirable. And at the same time, if they're paranoid, right? Everybody's out to get me, but I'm not going to let them. I'll go live in the mountains. Also, not sublime, not admirable in the way that we're thinking of here. But on the other hand, there is a misanthropy, the kind that Schopenhauer, I think, was just talking about, which involves being still a man of advancing years, over 40, as Schopenhauer said, who still has a philanthropic spirit, right? I still want the best for mankind. I still sort of will mankind's good. I want to be good to people, but from long and sad experience, I am removed from delight in mankind. I no longer take joy, no longer delight. I've been let down too many times. I'm trying to help people out, and they always disappoint me, right? They're always sort of, venal or corrupt or small-minded and petty. And after a long span of years, I get to be 50, get to be 60. I haven't slid into contempt or paranoia, but I'm just kind of disappointed, right? And that's the kind of misanthropy I think that Kant here is singling out, that I think Schopenhauer also was onto as well. Kant goes on. We see evidences of this in the propensity to recluseness, in the fanciful desire for a retired country seat, or else, with the young, in the dream of the happiness of being able to spend one's life with a little family on an island unknown to the rest of the world, material of which novelists or writers of Robinsonades know how to make such good use. I don't know if that Robinsonade refers to Robinson Crusoe or Swiss Family Robinson, perhaps to both. I've not looked up what the timing is there. Falsehood, ingratitude, injustice, and the puerility of the ends which we ourselves look upon as great and momentous, and to compass which man inflicts upon his brother man all imaginable evils, these all so contradict the idea of what men might be if only they would, and are so at variance with our active wish to see them better, that to avoid hating where we cannot love, it seems but a slight sacrifice to forego all the joys with fellowship of our kind. That's a good sentence, although a long one, from Kant. Falsehood, ingratitude, injustice, the puerility, the sort of infantile shallowness of the ends that people pursue and inflict great evils upon each other in pursuit of, are such as to contradict the idea of what human beings could be. Keep in mind, I'm describing here a sort of noble philanthropic spirit in an older person. I still want what's good for mankind, and yet there they are, just doing these same puerile, unjust, grubby things to each other still, right? And so out of a kind of moral desire to avoid sliding into contempt and hatred myself, so as not to avoid hating where I cannot love, I am willing to sacrifice the good of society and withdraw to my sort of mountain recluse, not from contempt, not from fear or paranoia, but because I just don't want to be let down anymore. I feel like this will not go well for me and my relationship to the human race if I continue trying to help people and continue letting them disappoint me, as they inevitably do. There's a sort of kind of wistful sadness here that I think Kant is describing. Kant goes on. This sadness, which is not directed to the evils which fate brings down upon others, a sadness which springs from sympathy, but to those which they inflict upon themselves, one which is based upon antipathy in questions of principle, is, okay, I'll explain the first half of that sentence. This sadness is not because people, not out of sympathy for the victims of injustice inflicted upon other people, but a sort of moral, principled dislike or sadness at the corruption that people bring upon themselves through their own immoral behavior. Okay? This sadness is sublime because it is founded on ideas, whereas that springing from sympathy can only be accounted beautiful, that is, not sublime. Saussure, who was no less ingenious than profound, in the description of his Alpine travels, remarks of Bonhomme, one of the Savoy mountains, there reigns there a certain insipid sadness. He recognized, therefore, that besides this there is an interesting sadness, such as is inspired by the sight of some desolate place into which men might fain withdraw themselves, so as to hear no more of the world without, and be no longer versed in its affairs, a place, however, which must not yet be so altogether inhospitable as only to afford a most miserable retreat for a human being. About that sentence, I'll note first, I think Kant went ahead in 1790 and did the meme. He said, if the poet writes about insipid sadness in a mountain, that implies the existence of an interesting, sort of the opposite of insipid, sadness. What is insipid sadness in a desolate, what is interesting sadness in a desolate place? It's precisely this kind of noble philanthropic misanthropy, so to speak, that we've been describing. The sight of some desolate place where I might withdraw, sort of a cabin, sort of a small place off on the rocky coast where nobody will disturb me, and I need disturb no one. And yet, not so altogether inhospitable as to be miserable and painful. So I just want to go someplace quiet to live out the rest of my days and not be disappointed by the human race any longer. Seems to be the kind of spirit that Kant is describing here. I only make this observation, writes Kant, as a reminder that even melancholy, but not dispirited sadness, may take its place among the vigorous affections, provided it has its root in moral ideas. We should remember, for Kant, it's always going to be about the origin in moral ideas, right? If this kind of sadness is motivated by morals, by moral principle rather than by sympathy with the suffering of others, then it has this kind of nobility, almost sublime quality to it. If, however, it is grounded upon sympathy, and as such is lovable, it belongs only to the languid affections. And this serves to call attention to the mental temperament, which in the first case alone is sublime. So that's the end of the passage that I'll read here, this note at the end of section 19, I think it is, of Kant's Critique of Judgment. Section 29, of Kant's Critique of Judgment, cited by Schopenhauer as a remark upon this same type of sort of middle-aged misanthropy, which involves a recognition that, for Schopenhauer, a recognition that one's own mental and moral qualities are so far superior to those of other people that I would rather simply spend time in my own society, that is, in solitude. Okay, that's Schopenhauer noting that there's a direct link between a man's preference for solitude, for his own society, and his knowledge of his own moral quality, especially in comparison to that of the people around him, people whose society is available to him. So the more superior he feels, the more he is aware of the reality of his own superiority, the more he will be inclined to something like what Kant called this sublime or almost sublime solitude. So that's my video taking a look at Kant's footnote referring to, Schopenhauer's footnote referring to Kant's critique of judgment. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much for watching today. Goodbye.